Welcome to Jaclyn Explores. Wow. I'm so excited to have you listening. Thank you for joining on this journey. This has been a long time coming for me. It makes so much sense based on my career and my interests, and yet I resisted it for a while. So, on this first episode, I want to orient you to what this podcast is all about, what we're going to be discussing, why I'm even doing this, but first, my journey getting here, so you can really understand who I am, and it will make a lot of sense, the things that I'm going to weave together and why I'm the person to do this. All right. So, you may or may not know me. I am Jaclyn Shea. Some of the titles I hold are somatic coach, facilitator, and science communicator. I'd say those are my main ones, but frankly, I am beyond titles and I don't actually feel beholden to those. I just use those to help you understand some of the hats that I wear. So I work with one-on-one clients doing somatic coaching. I commonly say that these are folks whose bodies are keeping score. Maybe they've experienced trauma, chronic stress. Maybe they just want to actually be more in their body and make decisions from an embodied place. So whatever the reason, it can be similar to therapy, but it's so oriented in the body, listening to that wisdom, helping people shift out of maybe trauma responses or ways of operating that are no longer serving them into a more embodied way of being. And really, my mission is to help people let their body be their guide. So that's my one-on-one work. I facilitate workshops, so these cover a variety of topics. Sometimes it's a scientific deep dive, sometimes it's embodied intention settings and getting clear on what you desire from your body. Sometimes it's something called Yoga Nidra, which will have you feel like you are floating in space and leave you so refreshed. I also am facilitating more and more authentic relating, which is a really juicy way of deeply connecting, of building those relational skills that you can feel seen and heard and grow your capacity to share your authentic self. I facilitate a group program called Body Language Lab. It's going on right now as I'm recording this, and the current plan is to offer it twice a year in the spring and the fall. Body Language Lab is a 3-month, very slow-paced container in which I help you deepen your relationship with your body, learn your own body's language, both by giving you science and concepts that are generally true for most people, but giving you the practices and the tools that you can experiment with and figure out what works for you in different settings, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. And now I'm doing this podcast, and this is really where I get to wear that science communicator hat and where I get to be curious and I get to feel like a researcher and educator and just like have fun conversations and get to riff on concepts and topics that I think the world needs to know about. So I'm really excited. My professional journey both feels long and winding, and it's also completely, it all makes sense now that I'm having this point of view, even though to some people it might not, but I don't really care if it doesn't make sense to them. So I started working in public health and studying public health. And that's because I was exposed. I did this cool community service scholarship because I did a ton of scholarships. I did a ton of service. So I got a scholarship in college and was doing workshops and immersions and volunteering and was really introduced to social justice and to how it's not by accident that there's suffering in our world. It's caused by systems of oppression. And I was like, gosh, how do I be of service? Because I care so deeply. And for me, public health was a way to try to address some of these inequities and very tangibly improve people's lives through health. So this looked a lot of different ways. I started teaching sex ed to high schoolers, which was so much fun. And that's really where I learned how to talk about sensitive, stigmatizing, shameful topics and make it playful and meet people where they're at. I did a lot of research on HIV for prevention, including among it's called Men Who Have Sex with Men in the literature, to be very precise and behavior-oriented and not identity, and understanding their risk factors and behaviors. I worked on designing and evaluating sex ed curriculums, both here and in Kenya. I did really cool new research on new HIV prevention methods. So there's a vaginal ring that's out in the world in sub-Saharan Africa. I did research understanding what African women think about using these, because guess what? If they don't want to use it, it's not going to work. I did research on what it's like to be transgender experiencing legal discrimination. How does that affect your health? How do we improve your health care? That's just some of the roles that I had. And basically all of this was the various ways that I learned how to understand an individual person, their health, both at a cellular level, like what's happening on a biological, physiological level, how that's affected by their behaviors, how their behaviors are affected by their community, by society at large, how social structures, policies, the way our society is structured affects our health independent of our behavior. And all the juiciness between how all those different levels connect. And ultimately how power influences who gets sick and who doesn't, who has opportunity and who doesn't. And it really has just made me deeply, deeply passionate about not just helping people live healthier lives, but addressing some of the systemic issues that impact us. So that's a little bit about my public health work. While I was getting my master's in public health from UNC Chapel Hill in a Department of Health Behavior and Health Education, where I really learned how to understand people and design interventions, I was loving what I was learning, but I was really depressed, like so fucking depressed. And it just got worse and worse. Anxiety and depression was almost always with me. I was coping by smoking weed daily by the second year, and it just wasn't working. And there were these different paths that I thought I might go down. I thought I might, go work in HIV abroad. I thought I might go work for the federal government. I thought I might get my PhD. And like one by one, I was like, not that one, not that one. And I had interned out in San Francisco doing qualitative HIV prevention research and loved it. But I was like, gosh, if I worked here afterwards, I would be managing research. And I actually want to be the one talking to people. I want to be the one deciding what we do with the findings. I want to be the one designing the interventions, not just managing data collection, that ultimately someone with a PhD is actually designing the study. No, thanks. And while I was in San Francisco, I was exposed to human-centered design, also known as user-centered design, also known as UX research. And it's really how tech companies and innovative companies create products. They really start with understanding their users, understanding the problem, and creatively coming up with solutions and testing a lot of them, and then landing on something. And a lot of the methods were similar to what I was doing in grad school and in my research, but much more creative, much more fast-paced, and really oriented to like, let's put a product out in the world and not take 2 years to run a study and then maybe it never goes anywhere, which is very common in academic research. And I love rigorous research, but I really care about helping people and having an impact. So I worked my way into getting a job as a user experience researcher at Verily, aka Google Life Sciences, aka Google's health and life sciences company. And this was the coolest freaking job ever, at least for a while. So I basically got to do tons of different research, interviews, usability studies in which like someone's using a thing and I'm asking them questions to really understand, surveys, literature reviews, looking at competitors, like going into people's homes, like so many cool methods. And I got to help design a ton of products. So COVID-19 screening tools and tools for people to like be able to report, COVID symptoms so they could go to work. My favorite was working with the Substance Abuse Treatment Center in Ohio, where we designed a patient app for them and a clinician platform to help give them all this information and help them really serve their patients. A clinical trial remote, like being able to participate in a clinical trial remote, the app for the patients and the software for the team, the researchers, medical devices, which is so cool to research because there's like an app and a thing that they're putting on their body and how it interacts and like so many cool things. And I loved it. And yet, as my personal journey evolved over time, this was no longer as fulfilling, even though I learned so much. And I would not be able to start a business had I not worked in what's essentially like a Google startup. So it's got like both startup energy and Google energy. So even though I was able to like get this prestigious job and make these big changes, and like, yes, I was making positive changes in my life, ultimately my mental health was like kind of staying the same. And I'd have periods where I wouldn't be smoking and I'd be happier. And then I'd have periods where I'd be really struggling. And during grad school, I started experiencing pain in my shoulder and neck. And it only got worse and worse and worse. And eventually I saw a physical therapist about it. And they were like, oh, this is like causing you more pain? Well, I guess you're just going to need meds. That sounds like if this isn't working, then that's what you're going to need. And I was like, no, I'm too young. Like, I know the path that this goes down. And frankly, I have an addictive personality. I just do. So I'm going to not like, but I felt so hopeless because I was like, is this ever going to end? And thankfully, a friend referred me to a network chiropractor, which is different than traditional chiropractic. And I actually have already interviewed her, so that episode is coming up. So fucking good. But thanks to her, she helped me de-armor. She helped my body soften. She helped me feel more. She helped me learn that pain is a messenger and not just like a random thing or because I have a slight scoliosis or whatever. And so it took a long time, but through working with her, through working with a somatic therapist, through exploring somatics, I was able to not be in pain all the time. I was able to actually sleep through the night. I was able to actually learn how to be with intense emotions and sensations and not immediately numb out or start scrolling or just anything to not feel that. I really learned how to actually listen to my body and figure out like, wow, it's always talking to me and it's just my job to listen. And my body, my mental health, my emotional health is so different now. Literally like structurally how I feel. And there's things that I would call trauma that don't define me anymore. And they used to for a really long time. And I used to be really scared that things were never going to change. And it's ultimately because the concepts that I learned, the science that I learned behind our bodies and our nervous system and trauma changed how I thought about myself. Because I went from feeling broken, like nothing will ever change, it's hopeless, what's the point in living, to seeing like, oh, my body's actually always doing what it can to support me, and I can work with it so I no longer am operating in survival mode. So as I'm learning this, and as I like reach a critical threshold in my own healing where I'm like, I want to spread the good word, I start teaching workshops. And at first I was like teaching workshops about like everything, like both the UX research I was doing and this stuff. And it got to a point where I was doing more somatic trainings and facilitating more. And I was like, I can't keep doing this job. Like, I know this is what I'm meant to do. And so I'm going to take this leap and I'm going to do this work full time. And I have been. I've been building out my one-on-one coaching clients, that business, and just learning so much. I've gotten certified in somatic stress release, which is an amazing methodology I'll definitely be talking more about, but all about helping you, helping people really like actually go through our biological process of adaptation, which is our stress response, through listening to the body, through moving through your emotions, through deeply resourcing. And that we really can't do that emotional processing until we've moved through that, until we learn how to really be with ourselves. And, I started facilitating, and here we are. It's now so obvious to me that I have so much to share, and that, Instagram is too small of a platform for me. So I am starting this podcast. And my business is called Jaclyn Explains. It's actually a name that my friend came up with while we were stoned and giggling. And she was just, I don't even remember what I was explaining to her, but she was like, gosh, I just love how you explain things that are so complex in a way that's so simple, and it makes me feel empowered, and I feel like I know what to do about it. And yet I know that like you really know your shit and you're like simplifying it for me. And I was like, oh, what a good business name. Let me just like save that Instagram handle now and maybe someday I'll use it. So when I thought about a podcast, I knew even though I might do some episodes where I am explaining, I didn't want it to be all explaining. I wanted it to be exploratory, both in what I'm exploring, but also that this is a space for listeners like you to come and explore topics that maybe you've never heard about. And when I think about exploring, I think about curiosity. I think about being with the unknown, about that it's okay to not know. It's okay to have more questions than answers, and that's part of the journey. So, in this podcast, we will be exploring science, somatics, and social change, my favorite S's. I'm a science nerd. I love the scientific method. The scientific method has taken us from thinking that the earth is flat and the sun revolves around us to going to the moon, to sending out these incredible satellites where we can see the universe in beautiful depth, to understanding ourselves, understanding how ecosystems work in, I don't know, not that much time, like hundreds of years. It's pretty fucking spectacular what we can do thanks to the scientific method. I love reading dense articles. I love being a skeptic and being like, well, like, what does this really mean? Not just taking the headline that if you do X, Y will happen, but being like, okay, how do we actually know this to be true? And, you know, because I'm a somatic coach and because I'm the skeptic, I really want to only help. I basically want to help lift up the science that backs somatics. And I want to help people understand why they might feel broken, why they're struggling. I want people to understand why practices work. So don't just take my word for it that taking deep breaths is going to calm you. If you understand why, you're much more likely to do it. And if you understand why your body's doing what it's doing, you're much less likely to feel shame when it's doing something that is a brilliant strategy to keep you safe, such as disassociation. So I'm going to use this platform to elevate and explain the science behind somatics, our nervous system, mental health, trauma, healing, and a lot of things related to that. And basically, I'm going to explain the concepts that helped me go from feeling broken, hopeless, and frankly, not wanting to live, to actually understanding what my body was doing, that it was deeply adaptive and brilliant, learning how to work with it, and getting to a point where I really don't struggle with my mental health. And ultimately, it's like, okay, how do I share the science that empowers you to view yourself with more compassion and have the tools to live a happy, healthier life? So that's the science piece. And somatics is my primary methodology by which I help people. It's the tools that I use with my clients, one-on-one, coaching, workshops. Somatics comes from soma, which basically means living body in its wholeness. That's what the Greek root means. And so while our society prioritizes our brain and rational thinking, and this comes from Cartesian thinking, I think, therefore I am, you know, our body is what shapes our worldview. We experience the world through our body. So yes, we have a rational mind. LOL, not really. We do have a mind though, rarely is rational. We have a spirit, but our body is what experiences these things and what informs how we view, how we think, what types of options we think we have. And somatics are, it's, you know, there's lots of different types of somatics, which I'll definitely get into in an episode. But at its core, it's about exploring the felt sense, exploring what you're feeling in your body, learning to be with those sensations, learn from them, and maybe learn how to move through them, learn how to resource, learn how to be in dialogue with yourself, learn how to be guided by your body, not your mind, not your fears, but your deep intuitive wisdom. And really through somatic practices, I was able to shift out of constant pain, living in survival mode, always exhausted, to being able to move through emotions without being swept up by them, and learning that really my emotions are my teachers. So I'll be sharing somatic concepts that changed my life, the frameworks, and as much as I can, you know, somatic practices. They're definitely often better experienced via something like a workshop, but I'll do what I can so that I can give you the tools to implement in your life. And at the very least, I hope that these concepts will change how you relate to your body, and I trust that it will unfold in its own special way. Last but not least is social change. So I do what I do. I coach, I facilitate, I communicate for the sake of collective liberation. Yes, I love helping individuals and I care about them and I want them to have happy, healthier lives, but I do this for the ripple effects it has in society, and that the more people can feel, the greater capacity we have for being a positive influence in the world. So numbing out, overworking, relying on consumption or substances for momentary joy, exploitation. These are all mechanisms by which capitalism, white supremacy, and other systems oppress us. They force us into survival mode, into not feeling, into not fully being here and now, because we can't be fully here and now under the current systems. If we were fully present to what it feels like to live through this much suffering, we wouldn't just go on with our jobs. We would revolt. We would organize. So somatics awakens us to feeling, including feeling the full extent of the suffering and the grief and the harm that is being done by these systems of oppression. To not feel this means that we're able to be those good little workers that are just worried about being a good employee and making our money and putting towards that 401k, even though the world is burning, because we don't have bandwidth to think about those other things. So if we're going to create a new world, a new way of existing, of working with each other and all ecosystems so that our planet doesn't literally crash and burn, we have to be able to feel. We have to be able to not let the suffering overwhelm us. We have to be able to orient to a better vision, a future that's not yet here, in the face of all this. And that requires skills that only things like somatics can teach us. So I'll aim to highlight how seemingly individual problems actually have roots in systems of oppression and are ultimately social justice issues that we must address at the systems level. There's this thing that will go around on Instagram every now and then, and it's something along the lines of like, if we all need therapy, then maybe what we actually need is social change. And yes, all of us would benefit from therapy or coaching. It is not just if you're really struggling. We all could benefit from it. And we do need social change so that not every single person has to seek out services that aren't even fucking covered by health insurance half the time at their own expense because they're harmed by others. Like we need social change. You're struggling is not a you problem. It's a social problem. So I'll aim to amplify the work of activists and visionaries who are advocating for different ways of living, ones that are more generative and healing and less exploitative. And I'll talk about how many of our problems are caused by these more widespread inequities. I'll also get critical of how science and somatics can and have perpetuated inequities and explore how to make these actually liberatory. So, how can they not just be tools of white supremacy, for example? And how do we maybe decolonize them? How do we make them more just and equitable? Oh, my goodness. So suffice to say, there's a lot of juicy topics for us to explore. And I'm really excited for the episodes that I have already recorded and planned that are going to be coming out in the next few months. And who knows where we're going to go after that. I'm so grateful that you're here along for the journey. Let's explore, my friend. Until next time.